ॐ तव कथामृतं तप्तजीवनं विविरीडितं कल्मषापहं श्रवणमङ्गलं श्रीवदाततं भुवि गणन्ति पुर्याचन. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to squirt souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on the chapter with the devotees at Dakshineshwar, Part 1, and page 245. The date is June 15th, Friday, 1883. It was a holiday on account of the Hindu religious festival, Dashahara. Among the devotees who visited Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar that day were Adha M. and Rakal's father. Rakal's father's father-in-law was also present. All were seated on the floor of the master's room. Rakal's father's father-in-law was a devotee of God. Rakal's father, not so much. Rakal's father was a rather worldly person, well-to-do, and didn't mind that his son, Rakal, went to Sri Ramakrishna when he saw that there were also other highly placed people, devotees who went there and everything. Otherwise, he didn't have too much interest. But father-in-law was a devotee. So he asked the master, "Sir, can one realize God while leading the life of a householder?" This is one of the big themes that we have throughout the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Does one have to renounce everything in order to have God realization? Is it reserved for sannyasis alone and not householders? The reason for this question is, well, there are many reasons for it. One is this little fear that the householder will have to give up everything at some point. So they're hoping to say, no, of course, you can just renounce mentally. But the other thing is that there is a tradition among the very orthodox teachers of India that God realization is possible only for those who renounce everything, and the only ones who can renounce everything to take the formal sannyasa will be those who belong to the Brahmin caste and who are male. So this was called the Adhikaravada. It was a type of privilege, that they were privileged people that could have God realization. The privilege wasn't so much, it sounds worse than it is. Privilege was based on the idea that if one had been a devotee and led a pure life, was calling on God life after life, that they would be born in the type of family that would allow them to pursue spiritual practice. And traditionally, the Brahmin caste were the ones who were devoted to study and to dharma. They were the keepers of dharma. The whole caste system was based on this idea that there will be some who will be the protectors, like Kshatriyas, and there will be some who will do the business work, the Vaishnavas, some who will do service and be farmers and things like that. So it, it wasn't meant to be something that was exclusive. There's adhikara. It was meant to be something that we have an easy way of knowing if someone is qualified to lead a spiritual life by the family that they're born into. But in practical, from a practical point of view, it became exclusive, and according to the privilege of birth and male birth also. So there was this idea that you couldn't get liberation unless you heard the truth from the Upanishads. Another thing, another restriction, that only the Brahmins could hear the Shruti. It was restricted that way. You had to hear the Tattvamasi, and that many felt that this was also reserved for the final stage of life, sannyasa. So there was this idea, especially those who had some respect for this concept of four stages of life, that even the householder, at some point they should lead a retired life, and that at some point they should renounce everything. Now, Shukla Didi, I am not sure if at any time in the history of India this was followed very much by the majority of people. First of all, the majority of the number of the Brahmins who we would find in India would be a small percentage. So it would only apply to them, really. We're talking about the four stages of life. How many people actually followed that throughout the history of India? I had a professor in college once. He was a master in this the legal texts, the Dharma Shastras and things like that. And he said one time that we have all of these laws and there's a wonderful system of legal system in India, but throughout the history of India, it was probably just a few kind of chieftains, this panchayat system, who sat around and made decisions on things. That a lot of it was just theoretical. But in any event, people knew that, so they might ask this question: that is it necessary to renounce everything? This is the question that was asked. So can one realize God while leading the life of a householder? So hidden behind that question is: do we have to renounce? Can we not do it the way we are now? Now, this is somebody who is obviously not young anymore. So Rakhal, but he didn't have to be that old. Rakhal's wife was 15 or something at page 246. So, I mean, he could have been young. He could have been in his 30s or something like that. So, anyhow, we don't really know. So, Master with a smile, why not? So he encouraged sannyasa for those who were qualified for it, and for them he used to say it is necessary. For those who were more qualified for the householder life, he would say it's not necessary. Now, are they two different teachings? Is he being hypocritical? I don't think so. He was encouraging each one and the path that was best suited for them. And in fact, I'm going to start a two-part series. It's an old talk, of course, on each is great in its own place. This was Swamiji's lecture about the householder and the sannyasi. That the ideal householder is a very high ideal, and of course they can realize God through that. The ideal sannyasi is also a very high ideal. So it's not a question of which one is better, but this is the real meaning of adhikara. It's not a question of privilege. It's a question of what suits us. Georgia Pete Shoy, Thakur used to say, when deciding what food to eat, it has to be something that suits our stomach. So anyhow, he says, why not? Live in the world like a mudfish. So there are many teachings that we find with regard, many examples that Thakur gives. The mudfish lives in the mud, but itself remains unstained, or live in the world like a loose woman. She attends to her household duties, but her mind is always on her sweetheart. This is, of course, we'll never say that Radha is a loose woman, but it's a little bit of that idea, this Madhur Bhava, that Radha's love for Krishna was attended by this absence of shame. That here she's a married woman, actually a girl. She's married young, and she's married, and for her to be going out and longing for this other person, it's something outside of the bounds of the ordinary understanding of the way society works. So we have this swakiya and parakiya, these two different types of madhur bhava. One is the love that the wife has for her husband, and is considered a very high ideal, a very pure type of love the wife has for the husband. Shuncho. And the other is the love that the woman has for her boyfriend, huh? Her paramour, which is considered much higher. Huh? True. Oh, it's considered much higher because uh, it's going in the face of public opinion, and we don't care what anybody thinks. So there's something special about that. So Thakur giving this example, live in the world like a loose woman. She attends to her household duties, but her mind is always on her sweetheart. So this has that idea that uh, whatever we do, the mind should be fixed on God throughout the day. And the attraction that we have for thinking of God should be the same attraction that the woman has for her boyfriend, huh? Thinking about him all of the time and having to sneak away. And when can she do it? This and that. It's nicer to think of Radha and Krishna, huh? That when will she be able to get out and go and see him? And so that's considered this parakiya madhurabhava. It's considered a very high thing. But the main point is that in the midst of doing all of the household duties, that one keeps the mind fixed on God. Somehow, by some means, to keep the mind fixed on God. And these are just different examples. So the first one that he says, live in the world like a mudfish. So this is that idea that we're not attached to anything. So we live without any attachment to the world. Nothing clings to us. Nothing will stain us. There's a type of fish that no matter how dirty the water is, how mud, as soon as it comes up, has a very slippery kind of surface, huh? So nothing can stick to it. They talk about the lotus leaf. If you take water and you throw it on the lotus leaf, it balls up a little bit and runs off. It won't stick to it. Other type of leaf, the leaf will get wet. Lotus leaf, it doesn't do that. So we have all of these types of examples. So this one is that detachment. But the second one is this anuraga, and keeping the mind fixed on God. So detachment from the world and attachment to God. These are the two things for everyone. This distinction between the sannyasin and the householder is very often a false distinction, because the difference between the householder and the sannyasin boils down to just a few little things, huh? Marriage and family and job. Huh? Otherwise, we have our duties in the world. We have to cook and clean and eat and do everything that everybody else has to do. 99% of the things are in common. There's just a few little things are different, huh? Which is kind of big things, of course, but still, we have to put all of these things into practice the same way that everybody else does. We have to keep our minds fixed on God, and we have to not be attached to the world. We have to not have any longing for the fruits of action. We have to not care if people praise us or blame us or criticize anything. We have to do exactly those same things that everybody else has to do. From that point of view, there's no difference whatsoever. The main thing is that we have one advantage, that to practice detachment when one has a family is much more difficult. If one has no children but has lots of kids that they love, huh? I have that. We have so many wonderful kids here that I love them, but it won't be the same type of attachment that a parent has with, and it's not all bad, but some of it is just this clinging and worrying and all sorts of things that are natural. They're not good or bad things. They're very natural things. We're free from that. We're lucky that way as sannyasins. We don't have to pretend that we don't own anything. This house doesn't belong to me, because it doesn't belong to me. The householder has to develop that attitude that this belongs to God. It's not mine. That live in the world like the maidservant in the rich man's house, all of that. We have no choice because we don't own any of these things. So we have a few advantages that way, but Thakur will say the householder also has some advantages. But the main point is that everything is a question of the mind. And sannyasin and the householder both have to practice these two very important things. Live in the world like a mudfish. Don't let anything cling to us. Don't let anything stain us. Just to be able to shake everything off, like the waterfowl. It gets wet and it shakes around and the water all flies off. And the second thing is that doesn't matter what we're doing, the mind should be fixed on God the whole time. If we can do that. Thakur gives another example, the person with a toothache. That no matter what they're doing, a little bit of the mind will always be on that ache. They can't get their mind off of it if it's constantly aching, something like that. So the mind should be on God mostly the whole time. How much of the mind? If we give 25% of the mind to the world, we hear different things, of course, but we'll be able to do things more efficiently than most people. 75% of the mind can be thinking of God. Otherwise, our mind is scattered and very little is on what we're doing anyhow. Do your duties in the world, fixing your mind on God. But this is extremely difficult. Now, this is a very practical thing that another advantage that the sannyasin has, of course, not as much in this country, but in a traditional Indian setting, is that they're protected, that they're not coming in constant contact with objects of enjoyment and enticements and things like that. In this culture, especially with television and movies and everything, with constantly and advertising, constantly everything is buy me, watch me, enjoy me. Everything is in front of us like that, tempting us. So the sannyasin doesn't have that quite as much. Although, as I say, we don't have the same protections here as we would living in one of the ashrams in India. So it's extremely difficult. I said to the members of the Brahmo Samaj, they'll be all householders. They didn't have this system for sannyasa. Suppose a typhoid patient is kept in a room where there are jars of pickles and pitchers of water. How can you expect the patient to recover? The very thought of spiced pickles brings water to one's mouth. So this is a very important idea that sometimes we think that it's all a question of strength of mind, that if my mind is strong, then why should it be attracted to something? If I'm trying to quit drinking, suppose I have a drinking problem, and I say to myself, no, I'm determined not to drink. Let me test myself. And I'll go to the bar and watch everybody else drink. Why do this? It's just making it harder. That the thing to do is to remove ourselves from the situation so that we're not constantly fighting all of the time. So Thakur always talks about that when he talks about this small sapling that's planted, that you have to put a hedge around it, put a little fence around it. Otherwise, the cows and the goats will come and they'll eat it up. So this fence that we put, this self-protection, is being very cautious about what we do and who we mix with and the places where we go, things, all of those things, our environment. Theoretically, it shouldn't matter. I'm detached, I'm the witness, nothing affects me, but it does affect us. So Thakur says, especially in the beginning, when the tree gets a little stronger, you can take the fencing down. When it gets big, you can tie an elephant to it. Then it'll be perfectly strong. But in the beginning, and for most of us, this beginning stage is a long stage. We shouldn't be ashamed to say that we're beginners in spiritual life. I remember one lecture by Swami Ashokanandaji, a very nice lecture, where he talks about that in the beginning stages, and he said, and don't think that we've gone beyond these beginning stages. The beginning stage is a long time, but it doesn't mean that we haven't done anything in spiritual life. It simply means that the beginning stage is where we're doing our spiritual practice and struggling and everything, that once we go past that beginning stage, we're practically at the end. So the beginning stage is all the way we talk about this Vaidhi Bhakti and this Anuraga. So the Vaidhi Bhakti, that'll be all the way up to almost the last rung of the ladder, the last step to the roof. So we shouldn't feel bad if we're still in that stage. So it is important for us to protect ourselves with regard to the company that we keep, with the things that we do, the exposure we have to different things, to what we read, what we watch. So all of these things make a big difference. Otherwise, it's like the typhoid patient. He says, the very thought of spiced pickles brings water to one's mouth. To a man, woman is like that pickle. And to a woman, man is like that pickle. These things. Thakur is talking to men all of the time. That's why everything sounds like, oh, why is he always talking about women or temptation? He's talking to women, he'll say the same thing about men. And Holy Mother did that, of course. She used to warn them about that. But this is mostly for these, he's talking to the householder there, but don't forget that there are others in the room also. And this was the teaching that he always gave to the young boys, that be very cautious about keeping the company of women. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but the desire may come into your heart. That's all. Lust is something natural that can come up at any time. So keep yourself away from situations that will bring that to the surface. Now, this doesn't mean that women should be hidden away and they should wear veils and do all of that. That's putting the burden on them, as if it's their fault and everything. But anyhow, this is that idea. So he says, to a man, woman is like that pickle, the craving for worldly things, which is chronic in man. Chronic in man. What does chronic mean? We have a doctor here. We have two doctors. What is a chronic disease?
Yeah, it goes on forever, hard to eradicate.
Goes on forever, hard to eradicate. Yeah. So Thakur used to say that the disease of the world, that it's become chronic. So yeah, I know about these chronic things. I used to get this little chest infection, and would take a few weeks to get over it. I got it from India, Calcutta mostly. Yeah, every time I would go there, I would get this chest infection, and I would come back, and it would take a little time, and then again it would happen. It would take a little bit longer. Then the last time I got it, it hasn't left. It's become chronic. So you'll hear me doing this all of the time. So that's chronic. So that means that there's a disease of worldliness. It's not something that comes and goes. It's there all of the time. But it doesn't raise its head if we don't give it a chance. This is Thakur's point here. So the typhoid, there's no end to its craving. The craving for, to a man, the craving for worldly things, which is chronic in man, is like the patient's craving for water. There's no end to this craving. Now, why is he craving water? Because the pickles are there in the room. If they're not there, still he may be thirsty, but it won't be the same. It won't be the same. That craving won't be the same if he's not in contact with that. The patient says, typhoid patient, I shall drink a whole pitcher of water. The situation is very difficult. There is so much confusion in the world. If you go this way, you are you are threatened with a shovel. If you go that way, you are threatened with a broomstick. Again, in another direction, you are threatened with a shoe beating. Now, what does all of this mean? He's just saying that there are temptations. Every direction we go, there'll be people that represent obstacles to our spiritual life. Even well-meaning friends. They say, come out, come to it. We're going to have a party tonight. You do your meditation every night. Skip one night. Huh? This is the broom. Huh? Then there'll be other people who may get angry at us and yell at us and do all sorts of things. And so there are all different obstacles in spiritual life. It's not easy. And even people who love us, they say, yeah, we want to be with you. Spend some time with us and everything. We say, oh, okay, we'll compromise a little. Of course, we have to compromise a little, but not too much. Besides, one cannot think of God unless one lives in solitude. Okay, now, this is a little too strong. We can think of God not living in solitude, but there's some advantage if we can go into, and Thakur doesn't say go into solitude all of the time. He says, as long as you can, even if it's a few days, even one day, even if it's the corner of your house. That means that we have to withdraw a little bit and seriously think and do something out of the public eye. So we know that we're sincere and we're serious about it. Then we can really have some understand we have some depth of this. The goldsmith melts gold to make ornaments, but how can he do his work well if he is disturbed again and again? So the solitude, uh, there are no disturbances, but that's not the whole of it. There's a psychological element to it that when we're alone, we find out what's important to us and where the mind is going. We can easily analyze ourselves when there's nobody else around. We can see what things are lurking behind in the mind and everything. So some people can't do it. There's solitude that they're not accustomed to it, or they get bored, or the mind gets too restless. And some people don't like to face. They're kind of not always inner demons, but just things lurking beneath the surface. It's good to do this every once in a while. I'm not much in favor of this constant self-analysis. But Swami Brahmananda, he says at the end of the day, look back on the day and observe what you did that day. Did you do things the way you wanted to? Did you lose your temper? Did you remember God? Did you do things as an offering? How attached were you? Analyze a little bit and then make corrections and everything and see if we can do better the next day. It's a very good practice. So the goldsmith melts gold to make ornaments, but how can he do his work well if he is disturbed again and again? Suppose you are separating rice from bits of husk. You must do it all by yourself. Every now and then you have to take the rice in your hand to see how clean it is. But how can you do your work well if you are called away again and again? Yeah, I was doing a little work in the shop the other day, and nice people who kind of wanted to help. And finally, I just had to say, I have to really concentrate and think. I have to be alone doing all this. Don't feel bad. I'm not trying to be mean or anything. But sometimes we have to really. Nobody else is around. We can stop. We can think. No, I have to do this and this and this, and spiritual life. There are times when we have to do that also. We have to just withdraw and take stock every once in a while. And what have we done? What do we need to do? All of these things. Hey, devotee, what then is the way, sir? So now Sri Ramakrishna, he's saying you don't have to renounce the world, but you have to go into solitude sometimes, which is not easy for everybody. You have to think of God all of the time, not easy. You can't be attached. Nothing can cling to you. Not easy. So he says, what then is the way, sir? Master, there is a way. So he's saying, even though it's not easy, there is a way. One succeeds if one develops a strong spirit of renunciation. Now, Thakur gives different answers at different times, and it has nothing to do with him being inconsistent. They are all brilliant answers. And none of them are contradictory. If he says the whole thing is love of God, we say, well, how is loving God and renunciation? How are they not different things? They're not different things. For Thakur, renunciation means that giving up the little and accepting the greater. Renunciation means that we love the ideal. We have longing for realization. If we're devotees, love of God, and our interest in the world becomes less and less and less. So renunciation, this word, vairagya, is used here. I prefer dispassion. I think it's a closer definition. Although, of course, we use vairagya. Those who have vairagya will renounce the world. It's kind of a standard idea. But it really means that this virakta is some type of passion. And rakta means what? Blood. Huh? So there's blood is passion. Huh? when our face turns red and everything. So this be when we're free from that. So to have a little bit of this dispassion, that not always running after things in the world and enjoying everything that way. Uh, but Vairagya does have this other meaning, and this other one is a very strong thing, and this is strictly for the sannyasi, where they just want to throw everything off. They just want to get rid of it. They want to escape. They say, well, escaping is a good. This to practice to do escapism. We always say, no, it's not. Yeah, this is just pure escapism, and people will say that. I've heard it myself. This is pure escapism, and what answer would Thakur give? If you're in a forest and it's on fire, won't you try to escape? So he said, for those who to whom this world is like a blazing forest fire, and he says to whom whose relatives seem like black cobras, they're the ones who renounce. Not that we don't love our relatives, but just the idea of attachment and everything. So here, he won't be talking about that. He's talking to the householders. So this means that really losing our taste for worldly enjoyment and increasing this longing for God. That'll be the strong spirit of renunciation. Give up at once with determination what you know to be unreal. Now, again, this unreal word, what is the word? Anitya. Okay. Yeah. You all know I have a problem with this word unreal. That generally Thakur will say transitory, anitya, or obostu, that insubstantial. He doesn't like this mithya word, this false or unreal that way. But so really, I think it's much better. Give up with determination what you know to be transitory, insubstantial, hollow, like smoke. That we just can't. It won't. That which won't ultimately uh, remove whatever longing we have, whatever feeling of emptiness we have. That we keep trying to fill something, some empty longing for something, whatever we understand to be incapable of doing that, then give it up. Give it up. Now, does that mean that we can't enjoy little things every once in a while? Of course we can. There's no harm in that because now it's just a little side thing, a little diversion thing. We know that that's not the real thing. In fact, sometimes the little diversion is good. Otherwise, the mind, we force it too much in one direction, it can rebel a little bit. It's good to have a little. I've mentioned many times that one of our Swamis, I think Shankaranandaji, one of the presidents of the order, when he was asked by some of the brahmacharis to give some advice, he says, good to have a hobby, a little diversion, and something that the mind brings a little happiness to the mind. But we can do that also as an offering. So we take up painting. We paint Thakur, Mother, and everything. The mind is fixed on them. It's a wonderful thing. We take up gardening. We plant things to serve to the devotees, to offer in the shrine. So we connect it that way. So it's not that there's nothing puritanical in Vedanta. The Puritans, the early years of this country, anything that could be enjoyable was sinful. Even nice clothes, you had to wear black clothes and this and that. You couldn't do anything that would be fun. They said, well, we're not like that. Look at Thakur, how he enjoyed so many different things. Even Mother also went to the theater many times. Holy Mother. And look at some of the great swamis of our order, how they would enjoy sports and other things, and even good food. We've had some of our swamis are real gourmets. They knew everything about cooking and everything. But understanding this is not the goal of life, and this is not what ultimately will satisfy that longing of the heart, that craving of the heart. It won't do it. So give up at once with determination what you know to be unreal, transitory, hollow, empty, and substantial. Once, when I was seriously ill, I was taken to the physician Ganga Prasad Sen. He said to me, I shall give you a medicine, but you mustn't drink any water. You may take pomegranate juice. Everyone wondered how I could live without water, but I was determined not to drink it. I said to myself, I am a Paramahamsa, not a goose. I shall drink only milk. Now there's a footnote. A Paramahamsa is one belonging to the highest order of monks. The word also means a swan. There's a popular tradition in India that a swan can separate the milk from a mixture of milk and water. It is said that a secretion of acid turns the milk into curd, which the swan eats, leaving the water. So they always give this example, being able to separate the real from the unreal and taking only the real. This is what the Paramahamsa does, what the swan does. But the other point here is that there is a role to be played by what we call sheer willpower. Willpower, that we just take a vow. In India, it's very common for people to fast one day a week or to not take a certain food, to do different things like that, not eat until they've performed certain rituals and things. It's very good because it gives us some sense of discipline. And we develop this power, this willpower, which is extremely important in spiritual life. To be able to just tell the mind, no, you're not going to do this. You're not even going to think about it. No food today for you, that's all. No questions asked. And to develop that strength of mind to do it. All of these things are especially helpful in the beginning of spiritual life. We get older, it's not so important. But in the beginning, to develop this. So Thakur is saying that just to convince the mind that, because we want to be masters of the mind. This is the whole difference between one person and another person. The one who is a master of the mind is a happy person. The one who's a slave to the mind is the unhappy person. The one is the yogi, the other bhogi. Now he goes back to this idea of solitude. You have to spend a few days in solitude. If you but touch the granny, you are safe. This is an allusion to the game of hide and seek. There was another footnote. Yeah, this everyone gets blindfolded, and somebody plays the role of the granny, and they run around and they try to touch. If they can touch the granny, they can take the blindfold off. So Thakur says very often that the granny is the Divine Mother, and she wants the game to continue, so she won't make it so easy for everyone to touch her. But she's happy if they do. She's also happy if the game continues. So this this is our situation. So touching the granny, that means we're out of the game. This, what do they call it? Musical chairs. The game of musical chairs. They'll start out, if there are 11 people, they'll have 10 chairs. And they'll play music, and you walk around in a circle. And as soon as the music stops, you sit in the closest chair. Now, each time you do it, one person won't get a chair. They're out of the game. And you keep doing it until there's only one person left, and that person's the winner. Now, Thakur says out of the game, they're the winners. They can sit back. There's no anxiety. They can sit back and just watch the play and everything. He talks about that other card game, that if you get a certain number of points, you get your cards are too high, and it adds up to a certain number, and then you're out of the game. So he used to joke with Keshav and others, I've already gotten too many points, I'm out of the game. But I can sit back and watch and enjoy and everything. So that was his idea, that those who are involved in the world, and very often involved in the world means that our view is cloudy. Another nice thing he said, if somebody's playing chess and has to make a move, there'll be tension and everything. They'll be thinking this and that and everything. Somebody is just watching from the side. He can see both sides and everything. He'll know which move is the best move to make, not the person playing the game. So this is that out of the game, It can mean formally becoming a sannyasi. Of course, the sannyasi can also get attached to the game, or it can just mean someone with that type of detachment that I'm not interested in winning this game of the world anymore. Uh, Getting the best job and making the most money and having the nicest cars and houses and clothes and everything like that. I'm out of that game. I'm still living in the world, not becoming a monk or anything. Turn yourself into gold and then live wherever you please. After realizing God and divine love in solitude, one may live in the world as well. Okay, now, Thakur is good to observe these things because Thakur is language. Sometimes he'll say, realize God, then live in the world. Sometimes he'll say, develop devotion to God, then live in the world. Live in the world means do your worldly duties. Everyone lives in the world. Where are we going to go if we don't live in there? Everyone lives in the world. But it means that you can have your job and you can have your family and this and that. Uh, but first have some type of realization. Now, if we look at the times when Thakur says, first realize God, then live in the world, we'll say, well, who's going to do that? How many lifetimes will it take to realize God? He's saying, as if it means first go to the store and then come back and do your homework. It's not like that. So then other times he'll say, first develop love of God. That we can understand. Get a little bit of this detachment, a little bit of love of God, all of that. Then no harm if mixing with other people and doing things in the world, we won't get stained by it as much. Here he's giving us two options. This is maybe the only time he does it, when he says, after realizing God and divine love in solitude. So it's not really an either or, it's both this time. But uh, we can say, okay, realizing God is too much for me. Divine love, okay, I can at least get established in spiritual life and have that as the goal of life and have some conviction and all of it. That'll be enough. The other is too high. We can't. Who will live in the world then? If it's restricted to those people who realize God first. To Rakal's father. That is why I asked the youngsters. Now, there's a little psychology behind this also. Don't forget that Rakal's father is here. So a lot of this could be for his benefit. I never thought of this before. His benefit, because he's trying to convince him to uh, not openly do it, but uh, convince him not to object to Rakal staying with him. Rakal was very recently married and even had a child. I don't know if he had the child yet at this point, probably already. But if Sri Ramakrishna can get Rakal's father to understand that this is not the goal of life, that there are some who are fit for renunciation and everything, then he won't raise that kind of objection. Maybe that's a little part of this whole thing also. Thakur was clever. He was brilliant, and he was, of course, a perfect God-realized soul, but he was a brilliant psychologist. He knew how people think and how they react and everything. Not clever in a bad sense, of course. So here it is. To Rakal's father. That is why I asked the youngsters to stay with me, for they will develop love of God by staying here a few days. After that, they can very well lead the life of a householder. Now, in Rakal's case, of course, Thakur knew that he was destined to lead the life of a monk. He had his visions and everything, but this is kind of a general teaching. And this is really the whole scheme of life. I was talking about this, the four stages of life. This is what the brahmacharya stage was for. You live in solitude, you develop the spirituality, you live with the teacher. Then after that, it's safe to go back and get married and have this ideal of dharma and this ideal of moksha and lead a householder's life. we'll get to it someplace, that Keshav never bought this. He said, this is what you say. One day you'll sting us. Huh? That means uh, plant that seed of renunciation that's so deep that people will want to give up everything. But Thakur, there were many times when he had householder disciples who wanted to give up everything, and they'd get a big scolding. He'd say, "Who's going to feed your children? Somebody from the neighborhood's going to come and do you got married. This is your obligation and responsibility." But in rare cases, if somebody really had the type of renunciation, then uh, he would say, make all arrangements for the family, make sure that they won't suffer anything. Uh, because were cases, Vijay Krishna Goswami, he was married, children. Of course, he didn't ask for Thakur's permission, but Thakur knew, of course, and probably encouraged him. Devati. Okay, now we got a big topic here. If God is responsible for everything, then why should people speak of good and evil, virtue and vice? One commits sin also by the will of God. Isn't that so? Now, I don't know if this is a sincere question, or if it's saying you give us all this nonsense that everything is God's will. Well, what about this? It's very hard to tell exactly how sincere this question is, but it's loaded with all sorts of inferences and all sorts of things. If God is responsible for everything, so that's the assumption. Is God responsible for everything? When we say put if in front of a word, that means that it may be or it may not be. But so he's saying let's work under the assumption God is responsible for everything. So suppose somebody says that, are we supposed to believe that? If that's true, so we don't know how if it's challenging or not, how he's asking this question. Then why should people speak of good and evil, virtue and vice? If God is responsible, then God did it. Huh? One commits sin also by the will of God. Isn't that so? Now, what do we think? Is it true? I brought this little, because I never remember things very well. A few weeks ago, we had that one Sanskrit verse that Thakur recited. Some of you may remember that I read it because Thakur never recites Sanskrit verses. He didn't care for that. He must have had so many things committed to memory. But there's one particular thing. This is from something called Prapanna Gita. And it's Duryodhana. It's a very common thing. Janami dharmam nachame parvrittihi. Janami adharma nachame nivrittihi. So I know what I should do. I know what dharma is. I know what I should do, but I don't do it. Then I know what's adharma. I know what I shouldn't do, but I can't help myself. Okay, now, it sounds good so far, humility. I always wonder about this verse. Then he says, Tvaya Hrishikesha Hridistitena. So by you, O Hrishikesha, Duryodhana is speaking to Krishna. So by you, Hridistitena, who dwells within my heart, Yata niyuktosi, des niyuktosmi, tatakuromi. I do as you make me do. Now, he wasn't a good guy, Duryodhana. Now, is this a good verse? What does it mean? How do we take this verse?
It's like he's saying that there is God's will and there is free will. And he's always executing the free will, which is all his ego and all his,
But is this something sincere, or is he saying, or is he just he's being completely hypocritical?
Yes.
Yeah. On the other hand, if this verse changed a little bit, let me do as you make me do, then it's a beautiful idea. So the beginning is fine. Because we're all in that situation that we know what we should do, but this kama krodha, there's all these passions and everything, they lead us to do things that we shouldn't exactly do. So we know that. And the things that we should do, sometimes we're a little bit lazy. We say, let somebody else do it. We may feel a little bit bad. We know that we should do this, we shouldn't do that. We don't always do these things. But will we say that, oh, God made me do it? that God dwells within my heart. I'm not responsible for anything. So this is a very interesting verse. I don't know the context of it, but we know that Duryodhana, he's not going to be spouting the highest wisdom. And does he really believe it, or he's just saying it? He's just trying to get out of it, and it's your fault. Rationalizing what he does. So this is that question, that if God is responsible for everything, so it's as if Duryodhana is asking this question. Same thing. Then am I responsible? If God made me do it, God dwells within the heart, it inspires me to do it, then how can you blame me? Huh? Then, before Thakur gets a chance to answer, another devotee says, how can we understand the will of God? Okay, another good question. Now, Thakur, he's going to give an answer that doesn't seem like he's directly answering the question. So that means that we have to think very deeply. Why is he giving this particular answer? He's not going to say anything about is God responsible. He's not going to say anything about the will of God. But he says, there is no doubt that virtue and vice exist in the world, but God himself is unattached to them. Doesn't seem like a very straightforward answer, right? Why is he saying all of this? There may be good and bad smells in the air, but the air is not attached to them. The very nature of God's creation is that good and evil, righteousness and unrighteousness will always exist in the world. Now, we say everything is the will of God. Huh? What if the will of God is that there should be good and evil? What if the will of God is that we should be responsible for what we do? Huh? We don't know how to take this will of God. Does it mean that everything I do is the will of God, or everything that happens is the will of God? I do my best. It didn't happen. It wasn't God's will. It wasn't Thakur's will. We say it like that. To me, that's a little bit better. I'm never going to say that whatever I do is God's will. And who can say that? The God realized soul. When there's no ego there, God realized soul can say that. Nobody else can say that. So it's a very high ideal. Then what about all these things? Not a leaf falls that's not by the will of God. Huh? What does it mean? Is God? Does he have the computer screens with all of the leaves in the world and say, now this will fall, now this will fall, now this will fall? Huh? Or is it just this is the plan? This is the divine plan. We don't know how these things happen. Huh? There's a very interesting term in Gita, Deva. When we talk about why things happen, what is the cause and effect of things? We have all different factors, and then it says there's a fifth, a Deva. What does that mean? God's will, fate, chance, luck? We don't know. Huh?
What's the meaning of God's will?
What is the meaning of God's will? We don't know.
Because God is God. I don't know. There should be no will. Nothing to.
God is not attached. It says here, does God really care? Does God directing all of this and everything? On the other hand, suppose this is the dream of the dreamer. Right. Who else is responsible for what happens if not the dreamer? But at the same time, suppose I wake up and I say, oh, I dreamt a horrible dream that people were killing each other. And somebody says, why did you make that happen? I say, oh, I didn't do it. I didn't plan to have that dream. It happened. It was it's very, very complex issue. I think the safest thing is to say that I don't know how free I am to make the decisions that I make, but I'm responsible for everything. And I know that there are factors pushing me to make a decision in one direction. And these are the passions. These are the anger and greed and lust and pride and all of these different things and desires.
Newton was the way he was. He probably had no control or no control. That's the way.
If we want to get him off the hook, we can say no, but we can say what could he do? That's who he was. That was the nature of his. Everyone acts according to his own nature. Another verse in Gita. We all act in accordance with it. Nigraha kim karishiti. What good will restraint do? But we can't accept that for ourselves.
In another place, Thakur says the khela chulbe na, the play will not go
Play will not go on.
unless there are all these characters.
That's what he says here. There are good and bad in God's creation. Yeah, that it has to be that way. Now, this is what I call the spiritual double standard. Somebody else, we can say, yes, that's their nature. That's the way they are. They're probably not happy being that way. But I understand that they make that decision because of all factors, this, and that. But with ourselves, then we have to say, no, I know that I should be doing this. I'm not going to make excuses for myself. I was just a case of that I was lazy or that I was selfish, this and that. I wasn't right. I'm going to try to change it. I'm not going to say it was God's will. I'm not going to say that, what can I do? This is who I am. This is my nature. We have to be a little bit tough with ourselves, but not too tough. We also have to be a little bit kind to ourselves. So I always look at this question of free will as a scale. That the more we're in the grip of the Rajas and Tamas, the grip of Rajas and Tamas, the more we have desires, the more or the less we have a faculty of discrimination and reasoning and everything, the less free we are. Or this is psychological determinism. And the more we have clarity and the more we have freedom from ego and desires and all of that, the better our decisions. And if we want to say, then we can do God's will. Of course, we don't know God's will, right? But we can say, at least if we act according to Dharma, then we can feel that we're doing something at least consistent with the higher plan of nature, something like that. If, like Thakur, Mother speaks to us and she guides us and holds us by the hand, then we can say it. Then we can say, I speak as you make me speak, Mother. I do as you make me do. But how many people can do that? So this original question, if God is responsible for everything, it should be, is God responsible for everything? And the answer should be, you rascal, you're doing all sorts of nonsense and you want to make God responsible for it. Take responsibility to yourself. That was Swamiji. Take responsibility for yourself. And then we say, well, what about God's will? You do whatever you can, whatever happens afterwards, you say it with God's will. That's all. And what does it mean? We say, oh, it wasn't God's will. It means that it didn't happen. What does it mean, really? We Bengalis, they'll say it wasn't Kopal. It wasn't in my fate. It wasn't in my future. I grew up with this expression my mother used to say, it wasn't meant to be. It's reassuring. Then we don't have to say, oh, if I'd only did it differently, it could have happened this way and everything. She said, no, don't worry. It wasn't meant to be. It doesn't bring God into it. It doesn't bring chance into it. A little bit wasn't part of the divine plan. Something that makes us feel a little bit better. So we can accept it a little better. It wasn't meant to be. You tried your best, but somebody else won. That's all. Just accept it that way. So does that mean that God wanted the other person to win and me to lose? We don't have to take it that way. So all of this is our mental attitude towards things. These are questions that we don't know the real answers. But whenever Thakur says that Mother alone does everything, we're instruments and everything, that's a very high ideal. And if we want to follow that ideal, then we have to rid ourselves of the last ounce of the ego and pride and desire and selfishness and everything. Then we can say that prompting of the heart, we can say is the divine presence within. Otherwise, we're being hypocritical. The very nature of God's creation is that good and evil. So we can say the will of God is the plan of God, if we want to put it that way. That's palatable. We can accept that. Plan of God is there'll be good and bad. There'll be the pairs of opposites. And there'll be enough free will that people can get in trouble. and do bad things, and people can do good things. So the very nature of God's creation is that good and evil, righteousness and unrighteousness will always exist in the world. Among the trees in the garden, one finds mango and jackfruit and hog plum too. Haven't you noticed that even wicked men are needed? Suppose there are rough tenants on an estate, then the landlord must send a ruffian to control them. The conversation again turned to the life of the householder. So we'll stop here. Yeah, when this question, do we have free will, is always asked as a yes or no. Huh? I think it has to be as to what extent are we free, and what does free mean? To what extent are we free from desires, and from the passions, and from the ego sense, and all of that? That's the degree to which we can say that it was a free decision. Free decision, maybe based on logic and understanding and reasoning and the advice of people who know more than we do and all of that. That's as much as we can do. Okay. Any final questions? Okay.
This verse,
Hmm.
this Kurila Janani Me
Yeah.
from Upani Gita,
Hmm.
I'm not sure what the chronology is, but
Hmm.
very close to this verse, before or after, or 2 meetings after, the same Duryodhana actually gets Krishna arrested by his God.
Uh,
So how is he saying that he lives in his heart? I mean,
he's giving himself an out. He's that everything is your will, so this must be your will also. That you're the one who prompted me to do that. Huh? Now,
prompted him to arrest Krishna.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's, I don't know all these stories, but Good.
Swamiji, I read somewhere, but I can't remember where it was, that when we talk about the free will,
Hmm.
any time we create any disharmony, whether in ourselves, environment, with others, or any time, environment, it is because of our free will. God's will never creates disharmony.
These are all ways of understanding things. These are not, metaphysical truths like we have mathematical equations and things like that. These are all attitudes. And Jaman Bhav Temni Lab, we've been going through this over and over again, that the attitude is not something insignificant. If that's why this idea, it wasn't meant to be. It's just an attitude. I don't have to say that with God's plan or anything like that. But if it makes me accept and surrender, then it's a positive thing. Then it's good. So if we say that anything that brings some disharmony, I'm responsible, and anything good, I can say that this is, at least I'm acting in harmony with some divine plan, something like that. We can say. Uh, I think it's a little dangerous to say that I'm doing God's will, because so many horrible things have been done in this world with people who say this is God's will, with crusades and things like that. So, okay, let us stop here. Om Niranjanam Nityamanandarupam Bhaktanukam Bhatata Vikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidya Tam Ramakrishna Shirasa Namah. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.